someone asked me to name 3 things to bring to a desert island, I would say Bear Grylls, Tom Hanks, and my Fuzz face. Knowing full well that I wouldn't be able to play it, I just love looking at the thing and holding it. It's fucking massive! Just seeing it reminds me of the music that made me want to become a musician in the first place. Plus, it smiles right back at me. It always puts me in the best mind state. Now let's look into the evolution of this baby. The Fuzz face came out in late 1966. I would describe the enormous circle enclosure as huge. Very, very huge. The Fuzz face's enormous circle enclosure was based on a 60s microphone stand base. The Fuzz face blew up in part because it looked like a smiley face. Used and adored by Jimi Hendrix, David Gilmour, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Dwayne Allman, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Pete Townsend, Eric Johnson, Joe Bonamassa, Peter Frampton, and George Harrison. Now that's a good Thanksgiving dinner table. And it's so simple. 2 transistors, 4 resistors, 3 capacitors, and 2 potentiometers. For hooligans, that's 2 little thingies that amplify electricity. 4 even smaller thingamabobs that make that electric current smaller. 3 teeny things that store that electricity, and 2 knobs to control how everything interacts. A beautiful, beautiful circuit. Mwah. Sounds like a lot of hoopla, but it ain't. To put that in perspective, a single A11 chip in an iPhone X has 4.3 billion transistors. This rudimentary circuit only has 2. One to amplify the signal, and one to feed back into the first. Elementary, my dear Watson. See what I did there? Circuit humor. I should quit my day job. It's a very close variation of the Tone Bender Mark 1.5, except a couple 2-3 changes, mostly to give it a thicker low end. And boy, is this thing versatile. Whereas the Tone Bender cranks the living shit out of your sound and makes it so sharp that your ears bleed, the Fuzz face turns your guitar into a lion roar. A throaty, atrocious, guttural yawp, beckoning for all with ears to succumb to its rule. This thing was the piece de resistance of Are You Experienced? It was the first pedal to include a DP-DT stomp switch, which stands for double pole double throw. This switch allows what's called true bypass switching. Basically, when the pedal is off, the circuit is doing absolutely nothing to the signal. No added hum. It's like it isn't even there. The Fuzz face has a very low input impedance, and therefore is very sensitive. When you roll back on your guitar's volume knob, the pedal responds and cleans up beautifully. Jimmy almost always left this thing on, even for his clean tone. It adds a beautiful sheen and a charge to your dry signal. But that also means when it's time for a face-melting solo, all you have to do is reach down a few inches and throw the knob to 10, which, by the way, is pretty much my favorite American pastime. Another interesting thing that happens with low input impedance is how the pedal reacts differently depending upon if it's plugged in directly to the guitar. If you place a Fuzz face first in your chain, you get the truest version of the circuit. However, when you have another pedal placed before it, something like a wah-wah, the circuit might react quite differently, especially when the preceding pedal has a buffer. The original Fuzz face used 2 germanium transistors. That Fuzz face is the version that Dwayne Allman put in the freezer. David Gilmour also used the germanium Fuzz face on the following songs: Corporal Clegg, Let There Be More Light, Niall's Song, and At Live in Pompeii. George Harrison was also seen using one in '69, so you can probably hear a Fuzz face somewhere on Abbey Road. These versions were originally gray, but some red ones came later. Now the blue ones used silicon, which didn't arrive until 3 years later in 1969. But some believe that Hendrix may have had one as early as 1965 because, well, it's Jimi Hendrix. David Gilmour used this silicon fuzz on When You're In and Money during the solo. It's also likely that David Gilmour had both a germanium and silicon fuzz at Live at Pompeii. Now that's what I'm talking about. A couple 2-3 fuzz faces in an ancient amphitheater half destroyed by a not-so-dormant volcano in 79 AD? Hell yeah! Jimi Hendrix used a Fuzz face on pretty much everything, especially live. He almost never turned it off. According to Roger Mayer, Jimmy used to buy a half-dozen Fuzz faces at a time and mark the ones he liked best, only to find that he liked other ones in different environments. Now let's take a quick pause to get you learnt about Roger Mayer. Now, he didn't invent the Fuzz face, but we're going to be talking about him a lot in the next few videos. Roger was Jimi Hendrix's guitar tech, pretty much for Jimmy's entire career. Roger started out making guitar effects in 1964 for a friend, Jimmy Page. Pretty good friend to have, huh, right? You might have heard of him. Roger also built some effects for other homies, like Jeff Beck. also a pretty good friend to have. You might have heard of him. Mayer's work can be heard all over the Yardbirds' post-1964 work. They even called their 1966 album Roger the Engineer. Roger owned his craft while working for the British Admiralty in the field of vibration and acoustic research for underwater naval warfare, which is fucking sick. His interest in sounds and the way it acts has fueled his career ever since. This scientific background has led Mayer to approach acoustic problems from a different, unique angle. But Roger first met Jimmy in 1967 at a club. In 2 weeks' time, on March 17th, 1967, both of them hit the studio to record Purple Haze, using Roger's brand spanking new invention, the Octavio, which we didn't get to yet, so hold that beautiful, beautiful thought. The relationship grew and grew, as both of them were revolutionary sonic explorers. Roger went on to invent the legendary console at Olympic Studios, which crafted the sound of the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, Led Zeppelin, B.B. King, Dusty Springfield, the Beatles, Procol Harum, and Pink Floyd. So yeah, holy f***. Still to this day, pretty much any studio you go to will have a console somewhat based on this console. Roger Mayer also designed and built Stevie Wonder's analog synth, and recorded 3 of his albums, all of which were recorded at Electric Ladyland Studios, a studio that Roger custom built for Jimmy's needs. And if that isn't enough, he also made 8 records with the Isley Brothers and worked for Bob Marley in Jamaica. So yeah, this guy's a big f***ing deal. Anyway, Roger Mayer says that Jimi Hendrix rarely used the fuzz face by itself. In the studio, we'd have some other circuits to put in front of the fuzz face to drive the unit differently. Of course, in the studio, you could vary the voltage you're running the fuzz face on, so we had much more control. I'd put different buffers with different EQs in front of them to drive the actual fuzz face from a low impedance source rather than the high impedance of the guitar. Then we'd add the distortion after that with a pre-EQ. Then we could also fuzz the device with a post-EQ. Now, I don't know if that made any sense to you, but here's a quote to sum it up. You're not gonna get the tone that Jimi Hendrix got on record with one simple device. That's not going to happen, mate. End quote. But all that jibber jabber was mostly a battle against the inconsistency between transistors. You see, the transistors back then were famously inconsistent, and many models wouldn't sound good at all. Others that did sound good needed a specific temperature to perform well. If you took a good one out of a freezing trunk, it might not sound good until you warmed it up. People even used heaters in the studio just for their fuzz faces. Others, as we've heard from the Duane Allman story, sounded much better when put in the freezer before recording. It was a weird but magical time of experimentation. And even when transistors became consistent, this spirit was never lost, especially with the fuzz face. The original fuzz face was sold from 66 to 75, when it nearly disappeared until Dunlop took over production in 1993. Some off-brand reissues were between 75 and 77, and also 86 to 2000, but they weren't very popular since everyone was crazed about big hair rock sounds. Those big hair sounds came from the sharp, crunchy boxes of the time, like the Rat, or just built-in solid-state distortion circuits and amps, not from a dark and woolly, oversized, smiling fuzz. But when that sound came back in style, boy did we get options. You see, the reason that a fuzz face is so very immortal is that it makes you want to experiment. Kind of like the golden age of muscle cars. The Chevy Chevelle was cool because it was a platform that you could make your own. Tinker away until it perfectly suited you. There's no mystery why so many of us are captivated by the fuzz face. Why so many of us have fallen under its spell. A relic of the crude days of sound turned into a magical platform of experimentation. There are 10 variables in the fuzz face, each with their own possibilities. And since the circuit is so simple, each makes a massive change. I myself will not be satisfied until I make every single possibility, just because I'm curious. That's why we started this whole music thing in the first place, right? F*** around with some parameters and make it sound interesting. Today, George Trips is in charge of making the coolest fuzz face product portfolio ever. They have the generic red germanium fuzz face, the light blue Hendrix's favorite Specs fuzz face with BC108 silicon transistors from around 1967, a dark blue fuzz face based on the 69-ish silicon fuzz, a copper finish Joe Bonamassa fuzz face with low-gain Russian old new stock Sovtek germanium transistors, and last but not least, a bronze Eric Johnson silicon fuzz with a low bias to get that sputtery tone. And I will not stop until I have them all! So, yeah, tell your friends.